Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's session and workshop on writing for publications and presentation skills. So the two really basically, if I can just summarize in one sentence, the aim of this workshop is to help you to become better communicators of your own particular research. Okay, so in as much as there's a part on writing and one on presentation, but the overall theme that runs across is one of training you to become better communicators of your own research. So the university has set a mandate to say that they require for you, as you will see as we go on the presentation, that you are required to submit and to write publication. So our job or task for today is to help you with the how. How do you go about engaging and tackling such expectations from yourselves? So what I aim to talk about today is not something that I read about in a book or heard about in a conference and it sounded really clever. No, it's actually something that I myself am navigating through as something that is expected of me to write and submit publications. So by using the tips that I will be sharing with you today, they've proven to be quite beneficial and have enabled me to be able to progress to certain stages of my career. And so because they worked for me, I have no doubt that the very same tools and tips can be quite useful and beneficial in your own journeys. So as introduced, I am Nozipho Gumbi. I am a junior lecturer from the Institute for Nanotechnology and Water Sustainability, which is housed under the College of Science, Engineering and Technology. So my research interests are mainly on water purification and water treatment technologies. So I wish to ask for you to bear with me very early on in the presentation that some of the examples that I will be using will be mainly centered around that, but not specifically or concentrating it on that, but opening it to be in line with our own, with the individual research areas that each and every one of you are working on. It's just that here and there I'll be making examples, but which will pertain to my particular research area, but that by no means is a limitation to say that the very same things cannot apply in your own journeys. So without any much further of your time, let's get straight into the business of today. So the first part that we are going to be looking at is writing for publication. So scientific research papers. This is now where we will be speaking about communicating your research through writing. Okay, you will see later on that there's other forms of writing for publications, which is not specifically or entirely for scientific purposes, but for this first segment, we are looking specifically at scientific research papers. How can we communicate through writing better? So in this segment, we'll be looking at what is a scientific paper or research paper? Why is it even important to publish your work? We'll go through some of the tips for writing for publications, and then we'll also discuss briefly how to go about selecting an appropriate academic journal, some of the do's and don'ts. Now, what is a scientific research paper? It's simply an organized description of your hypothesis, of your data, your discussion and conclusion with the sole aim to instruct the reader. I think this theme sort of runs across, as you will see also when we do the presentation skills parts, that your aim at all points of your research compilation or your writing or your delivery, your aim should always be guided by the fact that you want to instruct. There's something that you want to let the reader or the receiver become aware of. So the objective in your particular research is not just to collect data, but you need to be able to formulate, to test the hypothesis. After you have done that, draw a conclusion from the test that you have done and teach these conclusions to others. So how you go about doing those kinds of things is by writing a research paper or a publication. So there's a phrase that goes, interesting but unpublished is equivalent to non-existent. So it is important that whilst we are all in our different spheres or scientific disciplines are working on some interesting research, we need to be able to not only leave it at it being a research, but to get it out there, let it go out there, let it be published so that it can inform others. I think you might have heard, or you will hear of the phrase, whenever we speak of publishing, a phrase which goes publish or perish. At some point in your journey, you will have come across this phrase. So I want to share with you to make it a bit more open. So at the first stance, when you hear it, it sounds a little bit like what this cartoon is showing here, saying a Professor McWitt didn't publish and so he perished. I think at a first glance or interaction with this phrase, it sounds so dreadful. You know, it's such a closed off statement, but I want for us to unpack it a little bit more such that it makes sense. What is it that people are meaning when they say publish or perish? Because it's quite a recurring phrase, and one that if you haven't heard, you will hear as you continue in this research space. So the cartoon on the right, at least starts to, or it begins, I loved it because it sort of unpacked it a little bit better, that the first interaction that you will hear of is that you need to publish, okay? Which is why today's session or workshop is all about. You need to publish, and then the next step is you need to publish or perish. But what does that even mean? If we unpack it a little bit more, it has connotations of the fact that you need to publish in high impact factor journals or you won't perish. If we take it a step further and unpack it a bit more, publish frequently in high impact factor journals and maybe you will not perish. I think by the end, somehow, even though it's still grappling, it's beginning to make better sense than just it saying to you publish or perish. So what I want you to take away from this is that while these phrases may exist and you will come across, what is important and for you to notice what you publish, where you publish, when do you publish. Those are far more worthy and important points that you need to take into context as you undertake your own research. So if we look at the types of research papers that this is not all of them just, but some of the main ones that we find in the space of research, regardless of the discipline, you find that there are technical research papers, these which consist of experimental data, or surveys, they could be short communications or opinion papers. So short communication papers are simply papers that present an original and significant material for rapid dissemination. So, but okay, so they focus on a particular problem of a finding that is expected to have a significant impact, okay? And they are limited to about 3,000 words, depending on the journal that you submit to. You also then find some that are known as opinion papers or current opinions. These are original and personal views that the authors of a particular paper are giving on a particular subject. So these kinds of papers tend to outline or craft selected arguments in order to bring about some groundbreaking and original ideas and research. Okay, so even though it's called an opinion paper, it still needs to be based on published data, or it needs to be backed up by data. It's not just an opinion that is formulated just because, but it still needs to be backed up by published data. You then also come across ones that are known as review papers, as you would have seen. These ones critically review, they compare, they contrast previous research papers or studies in a field, and they provide new perspectives. I want to highlight that part of providing new perspectives and insights, because oftentimes when people first engage with research papers, at the first glance, it is assumed that a review paper is particularly a regurgitation of previous studies, where you are just saying so-and-so did this, so-and-so did that, so-and-so did this. So with review papers, it is important that while you are bringing to the front what previous researchers have done, you also then provide new perspectives and insights that, having reviewed, having critically compared, contrasted all these previous studies, what is your voice? So in as much as it is a review paper, it is a work that perhaps was not done by you. You are just, if I can use an example, you are just looking at things from an aerial view of the research. So you are providing, you are comparing, you are contrasting, but then you are also bringing your own voice and perspective, and you are guiding what's next. What do you think, or where do you think the next steps should be going forward in that particular field of study? So having mentioned the different types of research papers, I want you to always be mindful that in as much as they may differ in terms of the length, the contents, and so on and so forth, all of the research papers needs to be written in a logical, professionally sound, and a convincing way. So at all points, regardless of the type of research paper, these 3 points need to come out clearly. It is all about storytelling. Now, why is it even important for you to publish your work? Well, firstly, it is an obligation by the university. It's a requirement for master's and doctoral students. I'm not sure if you have had a chance to look at the procedures document for master's and doctoral candidates, but it clearly states that in section 2.6 that masters and doctoral candidates of Unisa are required to submit an article for publication in a peer-reviewed journal as part of their thesis or dissertation phase. The college should notify prospective students of this requirement prior to registration. So in the case of a master's, for a dissertation, 1 article needs to be submitted. If you are doing a thesis, this means if you're a PhD candidate, 2 articles should be submitted for publication. Okay, so this is a requirement. It's not simply because we are just wasting your time today. This is what is expected and required of you. Secondly, if your wish going forward is to pursue a career in academia, papers then become hard evidence that you can actually carry out the work, you can produce data, and to a certain extent, they become an indicator that you are able to work independently. If you look at the number of doctoral graduates in South Africa, when we read the statistics, we see that it has more than doubled since 2010, while that of supervisors has grown at a markedly lower rate. This means that we need you. We need to retain young academics so that they come back and serve as supervisors in this space. So for you to enter, or for you to progress and be attractive within the space, you need to be of possession of papers or publications. So unlike a master's degree, a PhD is not graded. So at the end of your PhD, you don't get a mark, a 60 or a 70%. No, you are not graded. What happens is that you either get a pass or you do not pass. So publications therefore become a strong indicator that the candidate can do the work. So they are an indirect reflector on the quality of your PhD. So they are a commodity and an indicator of the quality of the PhD or master's, hence the prospect of employability. So if we look at your PhD certificates and we look at your publications, those 2 things then together are assessed, and they are an indicator. Papers become an indicator of what kind of PhD it was. So the quality is indirectly shared through the quality of your research papers published. And then a string of impressive publications can propel a young scientist to the next academic stage, as I was mentioning before. So when I say string and I say impressive, I highlighted the 2 words in red to show that string meaning quantity, impressive relating to quality. So if you have many of good quality, you are good to go. You are already up there. But you can also have very good, so you can have high quality, but very few. That's still very good enough for you to be regarded as someone who has potential. But if you can have a string of poor quality publications, unfortunately, that reflects very badly on you, because you find that in some instances, people chase for numbers, they chase for quantity. I want to have 7, 10, 15 publications, only to find out that those publications are in poor academic journals. So as a start, even if you can have very few but good quality publications, you are on the right track. If you have very many of good quality, you are already up there with the giants. Now, what makes a good paper? What makes a good research paper? This starts with excellent research, and excellent research has a lot of backing of excellent research questions. The question that you are investigating in your particular research, they need to be important. They need to be of interest to others in your field of study. If the questions that you are investigating in your particular research are somehow questions that experts in your field are not regarded to be important, they are not talking to the latest trends, they are not talking to what is currently happening, then chances of you making it out there and being accepted for publications become very narrow. So as a start, make sure that the questions that your research is addressing are excellent research questions by doing your homework, looking in your own field of study, reading and seeing. So when you do your literature reviews every now and then, you are doing that not just to accumulate a lot of writing, but it is also to equip you with knowing what is currently happening, what is hot, what is trendy, where are the gaps, you know, and that then guides you in formulating excellent research questions and hence an excellent research. But after you have now formulated excellent research questions, you then need to start working on what we called an outline. So this is what you do even before you go to the lab or you start with your experiments. The outline is something that you start working on, that I advise that you start working on even before you engage with your experiments. An outline is simply a written plan of the organization of the paper, which includes data on which it rests. So think about figures already that will go into your paper. Think about how you want them to be organized, you know. Work on the outline as you collect the data. This, I think, if anything else that you take from this presentation, you can rather forget about everything else, but remember this part. A good outline is the foundation of a good paper. Start working on this as soon as possible. You don't even have to wait until you have collected tons and tons of data. It's a plan already. So what goes into the outline? Already you can put the title, the authors, the abstracts, the introduction, the methodologies, empty figures or tables. You can even sketch them freehand. The figures that you envisage will form part of the paper. Discussion points. So in point form, what sort of things do you wish your paper to discuss? Conclusion. Of course, the conclusion at this point, because it's still early on, you might not have a constructive, well-rounded off conclusion, but you can already have some sort of an expectation that at the end, this is what I want my readers to gain out of my paper. So in point form, even if the conclusion that at this stage you will be writing is not something that will eventually end up being in your paper, the final paper, but it is good to start projecting and predicting that this is the direction that my research will eventually take. And also the references. So as you collect your data, you keep, the information that goes into your paper, you already start working on your references and reference list. So over time, the headings, so all the title, the authors, all of those things, all of these sections will have subsections underneath. So this is simply a working document. With time, under methodology, so right now it would be a 4. But as you keep on building onto your experiments, you will have a 4.1, a 4.1.1. So subsections will be given birth to as you progress in your research and in your collection of data. So when you are writing a paper, a lot of thought goes into the organization of the data and the analysis thereof. Okay, and much of the other part of the time will go into writing of the text. So imagine if you can do this as early as you start your research, you are saving a lot of time that at the end you can now just devote the remainder of the time into just filling in the missing gaps with the text, because you would have organized your tables, you would have organized your figures, even though it would not be complete figures, but whilst you are creating this outline, you have a sketch of these are the kinds of figures that I'm envisaging. These are kind of tables, also putting headings on those particular tables. So this needs, if we can think of another way to look at it, it is a reflection of a flow chart whereby ideas are flowing logically into one another in the right order. At the end, your paper needs to tell a story. It shouldn't be a mystery. By the time people finish reading your paper, once you have collected all the data, you filled in all the missing gaps, there needs to be a story that people will walk away from. The readers that have engaged with the paper, by the time they finish reading, they need to have gained something. So always remember and have that at the back of your mind. So I've put here an example of what an outline is most likely to look like. Okay, so as I said, it is really a working document. It doesn't have to be a fully fledged on thing. No, it is done in the beginning stages and you keep working on it and feeding onto the different sections, the information that you will be collecting. Okay, so there's introduction, there's materials, there's results. You see, figure 1. You can even add figure captions. That figure 1 will be looking at the influence of temperature on this parameter. Give it a caption already. Excuse me. In the introduction, you can, because it's still in the beginning stages, it's a working document, you can start with the last paragraph, which is normally the study objectives, that this study is aimed at looking at this particular aspect and how are we planning to go about with that. Okay, so it's information that you don't even need to wait for the end of the experiment to be able to put together. As and when you are doing the experiment, you already know what the objectives will be, so start feeding it onto your outline. Now let's look at the title. The title of your paper, it should be attractive. It should speak to the content of your paper, but it shouldn't be too commercial or too PR, because remember, we still need to maintain that scientific rigor and relevance. It shouldn't be, because we are communicating, as I said, this segment is entirely meant for publishing or writing publications for scientific purposes or research purposes, and so it doesn't have to be too commercial and too PR stunt related. But if anything at all, it must always speak to the contents of the paper, because whether we like it or not, we judge the work or the paper by the title. If the title is not good, it is not revealing information, then we skip that particular paper, we will not read it. So the title gives a guide as to the contents of a particular paper. It needs to be concise, but it still needs to be informative. You need in your title to avoid symbols and commercial names as much as possible. So on the left, I've put an example of a good title. It says prospect and state of the art of carbon nanotube membranes in desalination processes. Straight to the point, says what it needs to say. And that's it. There's no hidden symbols, agendas. It says exactly what the contents of the paper is all about. Then if you look on the right of the screen, I've put also one of my own, the one where there's a lot of acronyms: microvoid free, PS, SPSF, or multiple wall CNTs, ultrafiltration membranes with improved mechanical strength, antifouling and antibacterial properties. So there was a lot of acronyms there. So it was, in as much as the paper ended up doing well, got a lot of readership and citations. The fact that there was a lot of acronyms and abbreviations may have been something that is not ideal, because you tend to limit yourself and your readership to only the people that are in that particular field and know what those acronyms possibly mean. And if you look on the other one also, on the right of the screen, it's just too much of symbols. It's hard. This was by another group of researchers. It's just too much of symbols that you end up not really figuring out what the content of the paper is. It might have been good research work, but because it has too much symbols, it may have missed a lot of attention from the reader. So always be mindful when formulating the titles of your papers, to ensure that while they speak to the content of the paper, they must still be free of many symbols and acronyms, and they need to speak concisely to the content of the paper. Always remember, it is one thing to get your paper published, and it's another for your paper to gain reader traction. So reader traction, what I mean by that is to get citations. When you get cited for your publication, sometimes it doesn't mean, so it's you can look at it in two ways. You get cited because people are in agreement with what you are saying. So every time they also come across a similar thing that you have reported, they will cite you to say, this is what we found, and previous researchers such as this one cited have also found a similar situation. You can also get cited because people are opposing, in some instances, your views on a particular paper, to say, author so-and-so reported that this thing works this way, but after we have carried out a few other studies, we have discovered that actually, instead of looking at the way that they did, this is how, when we look at the way that we did, this is what we come up with. But nonetheless, the fact that people are giving your paper attention, it's still good enough towards your profile. Getting cited is something that we all should strive for. We shouldn't just stop at having a paper that is published and it's out there, but it needs to gain reader traction. It needs to be attractive, and people must look at it and want to engage with it and find it useful in their own research spaces. Now, when it comes to authors of a particular research paper, these are a list of individuals that have made intellectual contributions to the paper. I should have highlighted intellectual contributions there, because it's very important that people that form part of your paper, the list of authorship, it's not just any person. It needs to be someone that really has made a contribution to your research paper. So some journals even encourage that authors submit something that is known as an author statement file. So what this is simply is, it is a separate document in addition to the paper that you are submitting, where you are outlining the individual contributions of each and every person that is listed in that authorship list. Okay, so what did they contribute? Were they instrumental in conceptualization, data curation, formal analysis, funding acquisition, investigation, and many others? So it forces you really that you are not here because you are my friend, but I'm putting you here because there was something instrumental, intellectual that you brought to the party. So it is very important that we take note of this fact. Now, in the list of authors, the student is usually the first author. So the person that carried out the research study, which is basically or mainly the student, becomes the first author, and then the supervisor will then become the last and corresponding author. So that means, what corresponding author means is simply all correspondence. So when the editor, after you've submitted your paper, when it's ready, you've collected all the data, you are happy with your conclusions, you are ready to send it out, all the correspondence is sent by the journal editor. They send it to the corresponding author, which is your supervisor. And I think it is important that I mention that whilst we may feel like because I did the work, I must be the one in communication with, it is important that it is the supervisor and not yourself that takes this responsibility, because they know better, okay? Also in helping you decipher the information that the editor is saying, is the feedback that you are getting back from the editor. They know best. And the fact that your supervisor is a professor, is a known scholar in the field, having him as part of your paper is quite important, because he or she already has a good publication record. And what journals tend to do is they also, whilst the content of the work is important, the profile also of publishers is something that they consider. So your supervisor is a professor, is a doctor, whatever, and they are known in a particular field. So when they receive publications that have their name in it, they cannot help but to stop and give it attention. Whereas if it's just you, in as much as you may have done fantastic research, they might not even engage with it because of judging simply from the outside that who is this person who now is coming and wanting to play in the space. So do not get tempted to want to put just your name in the paper from feeling that no, but I was the one that did everything I put together. We definitely get that part, but it's still very much important that your supervisor engages with your research paper, engages it intellectually. You have this back and forth conversation and discussion with him or her, and then you submit the paper and he or she becomes the corresponding author. What you will also notice is that next to the author name is the author affiliation. It needs to be included. So those little A, B's, and next to each author's name are author affiliation. So this is basically the university, the department, or the institute name that that particular author is associated with. Okay, so if you look at this example, I was the first author because I was the student at this point, and my supervisors then are put towards the end and have the corresponding star or email next to their name. So all correspondence from editor is sent to them, and then they share with the rest of the co-authors of the paper. So in the middle, it doesn't really matter who becomes second, third, fourth, you know. The important spaces are the first and the last space in the list of authorship. Now, moving into the abstract. Whilst you are compiling your outline, you will not necessarily need to write an abstract, because an abstract is basically an overview, a condensed summary of everything else that was interesting and that took place in the study. Okay, so whilst you are at the outline stage, you will have the section on abstracts, but it is not compulsory as yet, because for you to start feeding information into this particular segment, because it is born out of the fact that you have done all the experiments, all the research, and then at the end, from your findings, you then give a concise and a compressed summary of the events that took place. So this part, we leave it towards the end, but nonetheless, do put it in your working outline. So an abstract needs to be concise, yet informative. So some journals will give you a word count limit. So you can go by that word count limit in guiding you in terms of how much can I add, how much can I remove in my abstract. The length of the abstract, ideally, it needs to be about 1/2 to 3/4 of a page. Okay, it shouldn't be too long. Like now, it's now 2-3 pages. No, because remember, it is a condensed, concise, but yet information that accounts for the important findings of the study. Once it's now 2 pages, you are now, it's no longer an abstract, really. So generally, there is no need to give an overview. When you are writing an abstract, there generally is no need to give a general overview or opening sentence, unless you are presenting something that is completely new, a completely new area of research. What I mean by a general overview or opening sentence, I would make an example from my research space, where we are developing better tools or methods in which we can better purify the drinking water. So when I write an abstract, it is not necessary for me to always say the world is currently facing a water crisis. Over 7 billion people in the world are without water. No. So that general account and overview is something that you can save for your introduction. But for abstract, it's not necessarily to give it. Unless, of course, it's something that is completely new. You want to bring everything into context, then go for it. But generally, try to avoid. As an opening statement or sentence for your abstract, you can just quickly jump into herein we report on blah, 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 blah. The current study reports on. So just shoot straight in without waxing lyrical. Fourthly, you need to provide some specific or some quantitative details of your research findings, but not too much. So within the context of your abstract, you still need to provide some specifics, some numbers, some quantitative details of what you found. As you see here, I did try to underline that there must still be some numbers, some quantities, some specifics, so that everything is brought into context. Because what tends to happen is that people, firstly, they read your title. If the title of your research paper interests them, then they say, okay, hang on, let me get a sense of what was happening here by reading the abstract. They engage with the abstract and start to think, oh, so these were the values, these were the findings, these are the specifics. Oh, okay. Then, you know, so it's a step-by-step way of luring them into your research paper. So make sure that all of the necessary information, that is to say, once you are done, of course, is being captured in the abstract segment of your paper. Now, you need to, again, avoid using abbreviations, equations, and references. You shouldn't put a reference in your abstract or equation. So this you save for the body of your paper. I also wanted to talk to you briefly about something that is known also as a graphical, or some refer to it as graphic or graphical abstract. It is in addition to the abstract. So it summarizes the content of the paper in a pictorial form, as you can see on the right-hand side of the screen. So this is also a tool that journals or some journals use to captivate the reader attention. So if by looking at the pictorial depiction of what your work is all about, people are already engaged and will want to. So it's another way of trying to capture and grab the audience attention towards your paper by looking at this pictorial arrangement and seeing that, oh, so this is passing through here and this and this and that. So this is something that is generally not compulsory, but it is advisable that as part of your abstract, sometimes do include a graphical abstract, which is a compressed version of an abstract, which is compressed in a pictorial or figurative form. Now, going into the introduction of your paper. The introduction, we say that you need to at least strive for 3 to 4 paragraphs. And these paragraphs should be of no less than 3 sentences, okay? If it happens to be more than 4, it's still fine, but try not to make it too long of a section, okay? And how you can go about breaking it down is that you can say your first paragraph, you are presenting a general overview, a broad importance of the study. So this is where you are generally giving us the background of the problem. This is your first paragraph. And remember, this paragraph should not be less than 3 sentences. Moving on to your second paragraph, now still on the overview, but you are now pointing it down, slowly narrowing it down to the specifics or the specific focus of your research study. The middle paragraphs then can be aimed at critically reviewing the previous works in your field. Who else has done what? How did they go about doing? Okay, so these middle paragraphs basically are a discussion of works, but the works that you are discussing, it's quite important for me to mention this, is that it should be works that are somehow aligning to where you are driving the point, where you are leading us to that gap that you are wishing to tackle. So you are not just pulling studies from various angles, but you are trying to find the ones that are motivating the need for your particular research. So, which is why then the one before last paragraph, this one is based on these above critical reviews. It speaks to why your research paper is needed. How will it add to the body of knowledge? Okay, so one before last. These are the contents that should go into that paragraph. And in the last and final paragraph, this is where you must clearly state the objectives of your research paper, the objectives of your study, okay? And if you, by the time, already have obtained results, you must also summarize the general finding that your study revealed and why it was important for you to do so. So last paragraph, as I was showing you earlier in the example of the outline, it should speak to the objectives. Why are you carrying out the study? Why is it important for it to be carried out? That information should form part of your last paragraph. Now, coming to the body of the paper. The body of the paper is now your results and discussion section. This is where a lot of meat is found. This is where your tables, your figures, all the juicy parts of your work, the how, the what's, this is where it is revealed in the body of the paper. In the body of the paper, you must still maintain using short paragraphs, okay? Typically 3 to 6 sentences suffice in writing these different paragraphs. Try to minimize using very long sentences. So a sentence that takes about 3-4 lines before we see a full stop. No, that's not what we are aiming for. Short sentences, simple, straight to the point. Say what you need to say and say it quickly. Remember, you are writing work to be reviewed or to be read by scholars who are mostly busy, okay? So if you can capture the important messages and capture them very quickly, straight to the point without waxing lyrical, that would be very good and a fundamental skill that you would have acquired. Try to use elegant and eloquent language, but not Shakespearean. So we are not looking for wherefore thou art thou, no, but the language that you are using in your writing must still be scientific language. It must still speak to the audience that you are addressing, okay? Not simple terms like how you would normally use when you are just conversating around your friends or your family. But this is something that you develop and become better with over time. But at the back of your mind, I just want you to be mindful of the language that goes into the writing of these research papers is not just an ordinary, hey, how are you doing type of language, as you may have already seen when you were doing your reviews or when you have already started. Perhaps some of you have already sent out papers for publication. You already know what I'm saying when I speak of the language that needs to go into the paper, elegant and eloquent. We are allowed to use the words we or our. Our study has revealed that. Our findings have revealed that. We have investigated the effect of this over that, and this is what we found. So we, ours, those words you can use, but under no circumstances can you use the word I or my, unless you are, as you will see when we do the presentation skills part, when you are now doing the presentation. But even with that, you just need to tread carefully, because at all times, the research or the communication of your research needs to reflect that it is a group or a team effort, in as much as you are the one that is championing the whole research, but you are doing it as a collective. And when you are not sure about what style, in terms of the equations or in terms of how to put figures and tables, you can look at so every journal, when we get to choosing the journal, we will see this thing that every single journal that you submit to has got its own style. And before you submit, it has that guide for authors tab. When you click on the guide for authors tab, it shows you the style of that particular journal. So going to that style and also looking at the previously published papers in that particular journal would give you a guidance of how to put your equations, how to put your figures, how to put your tables, follow what others who have published in that particular journal have followed. Okay. Now, we also have figures going into the body of the paper. So with figures, try by all means to avoid using simple figures. When I speak of simple figures, I speak of a figure which just has one, which just has got one data set. You know, you rather a nice figure that is representative of the different variables that you were looking at is one that has at least 5 and above points. So if you can have 4, 5 and above points, you would have, it becomes clear for us to really see the relationship between your X and your Y axis. For example, we are able to read the trends better that, oh, when you were increasing temperature, for example, this is the direction that your graph took. When you were decreasing it, then the graph sort of took a different direction. But if you only have one data set or 1 point, then there's not enough information that we can extrapolate from that particular graph or figure. Okay, and try to, for that instance, try to use as many or multiple figures as possible. Use large fonts and symbols. Okay, so we must, as readers, we are going to see examples of some figures just now. We need to be able to read what your figure is communicating. So fonts must be large and clear. Symbols must be large and clear. Okay, the legends, which is normally that key which is supposed to be into your figure. So if you were using, for example, different symbols to represent different classes or groups, so those symbols in a key set, which is known as a legend, it needs to be clear that a star, for example, represents group A arrow represents group B, a triangle is representative of group C, you know, so those things need to be clearly set out for the reader. We shouldn't leave your readers with any questions. They should be able to interact with your figures and know right there and then what the story of your figure is all about. For your X and your Y axis in your figures, always make sure that you do specify the units. Okay, if you were measuring the effect of time, for example, make sure that the unit is stated, minutes, or is it in hours, so that everything is brought into context. We are able to make out exactly what is it that, at what level or influence the time was having on your particular variable. Make sure to capitalize the first letter of each word in the access title. So just before we move on to the next segment, I put this in green because I felt it's such an important point that we need to note, that the quality of the paper, eventually the quality, we need to strive for submitting high quality papers. If you remember early on, I stressed the importance of you can rather have few but high quality papers. Okay, so quality of the paper, the quality of the paper that you send out, whether you like it or not, it indirectly reflects the quality of the science or the research behind it. I mean, you could have done such a meticulously well-executed experiment, but careless mistakes and approaches can undermine your research. So check, recheck the paper for careless errors, check for information consistency, check that the figures, the tables that you are using or that you have chose to use in your research paper are really aiding into conveying the message of the story that the paper is trying to address. Okay, and what is also important to note here is that when you put a figure in your research paper, it is important that in text, you do discuss that figure. So it's not just about putting a figure 1, figure 2, figure 3, and you just keep quiet. That, hey, guys, see, there's a figure 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm done. No, you put a figure and you say something about that figure. Make sure that you check for those kinds of errors, but strive for quality. Quality reflect. As I say, your experiments your research could have been done so meticulously, but if there are those many errors, careless errors and things like that, then the whole research or your science ends up being undermined, and you might even end up getting rejected, so check for those things. So I've put here some examples of good figures, ones which I regard as good figures. So as I was saying to you, that clearly labeled X, Y axis, we are capitalizing the first letters of the axis. It's clear what it is meant to be. You see the symbols, temperature, in what units? Okay, it's in degrees Celsius and it's not in Fahrenheit. So put things as they are so that it gives a better context and an understanding of what the investigation was all about. Here, the legend, again, that I was speaking about, that make sure that it is clear, it is concise. We are able to make out, you see, if wherever you see these square blocks, it's referring to membrane M0, the one with the circle are referring to M1, those kinds of things, and so on and so forth. Now, what I want to caution also is that when you are doing these kinds of figures, it is important that you do not rely so much on color. Okay, so color is good, it brings out, it makes the figure stand out and nice, and it's nice to look at, but make sure that in addition to the differences in colors, the symbols by which you are representing different variables also are different. You are doing this because you want to make sure that even if I print out this research paper in black and white, I can still be able to make out the differences, that the ones that are square are this, the ones that are circles, this is what they mean, okay? So if I did not use symbols in this case and I just relied on color, it will only just be straight line or lines going down. But if I print the very same graph and I print it in black and white, then the message is lost because everything will just be the same. So whilst we are advocating for color and for the aesthetics, it's also important that the symbols that you are using are different to take into account for when your paper is printed in black and white. And then in addition to the labeling of your figures, the figure captions, okay? So you construct a figure and at the bottom you state exactly what the figure is communicating. What is this figure 3 about? It is looking at the effect of temperature on viscosity. What is this figure 9 trying to tell the reader? It's looking at the different water contact angle values, okay, of pristine membranes compared to the ones that are functionalized. Clear. Put a figure caption. So again, depending on the style that the journal is using, you will be guided by that. Some journals will be specific in terms of saying how you should go about writing the figure captions. So the fig or full figure or caps lock figure, all of that, it's just journal style guides that you will obtain from your particular journal of interest. Now, coming to the conclusions section of your research paper. At the early stages of your outline, this can just simply be a list of short sentences or phrases, as I say, because a lot of conclusions will be drawn based on the findings of your research. But that doesn't mean that as you are working on your outline, you are not already building onto the story, like what am I envisaging will happen? You know, if I increase temperature, if I increase pressure, if I increase this is what I think will eventually happen, because the fact that we formulate hypotheses, then we test them, then we get to find results, also means that we can, with our formulated hypothesis and from literature and from this and that, you can already start formulating somehow conclusions that you think certain parameters would drive your research towards. Okay, very important. Even though the conclusions section of your paper needs to be a summary of the events that took place, it is not meant to be a repetition of the abstract. You are just summarizing key findings. If possible, refer to certain figures or certain standouts or highlights that the research study unveiled. Okay, it's not only meant to be a summary. Okay, so where the differences with the abstract will clearly come out is that here you must also indicate the broader impact and significance of the work. So when you are concluding, you must also guide us as readers to say where to from here. Okay, so you have done this, you have investigated that, you have varied this and that, and you found that when you change this, this happens, when you change that, that happens. It's still also important for us to know that as readers, which direction are you predicting this particular research is meant to take off in the near future. Okay, we again should avoid using references and equations in the conclusions section. Some journals, again, depending on the style of the journal, some will have a segment known as implications instead of conclusions, but it's still somehow a same kind of concept where you are summarizing the important findings, but you are giving broader perspectives, highlighting the significance, driving the next direction of this particular research, and informing, because in as much as the research is about instructing and informing, it needs to also show us the where to from here. Okay, you are advising, you are already foretelling predictions of the research field, contributing to the body of knowledge. And then coming to the references. Okay, references, when you are referencing, what you are simply doing is that you are referencing the idea that you've taken from a previously reported studies or study. So I know it might sound obvious or tedious, but I think it is important for me to mention this because you find that sometimes people are of the belief that because I've put a reference, okay, I mean, I can take someone's work, I can take an idea, sentence for sentence, word for word from a previous study, and then I'll simply slot in a reference. No, because of plagiarism issues, you must rewrite whatever you took, rewrite and communicate that idea in your own words. After you have rewritten it in your own words, you then reference it to say that this idea, I'm taking it from a particular paper, okay? But it doesn't mean that you can simply take sentences or paragraphs from previous papers, slot them into your own and put a reference. No, references are not for that. They are simply for referencing the ideas, not the word for word, sentence for sentence. Okay, so again here you follow the reference style of your chosen journal. Sorry for the spelling there. You also need to be mindful. You need to be mindful of the number of references that you use, especially when you are doing the technical research papers. What do I mean by that? I mean, when you use too many references, okay, it can be an indirect indicator that the work presented here lacks originality. So this is important for me to mention because sometimes we tend to get carried away and want to reference each and every sentence that we are writing, and we end up with a reference list of about 80, 90 papers, and this is meant to be a technical paper where it's your experiment. So they still needs to show that level of originality, that this is an original idea, this is a new contribution. So while I've referenced these other 30, 40 people, but majority of the work presented in this particular paper is an original piece of work. So, but if you have used too many references for a technical paper, then that means that you are simply regurgitating what others have already said. But when you are doing a review paper, the opposite is true. You do end up with a long list of references because a review paper is meant to look, as I said earlier on, it's meant to be an aerial view in a particular field of research and then bringing about new perspectives or insights. So in its entirety, it's mainly a review of what has already been done. And then towards the end, showing what is new, what's relevant, and what is still needed, or what is still short of within a particular research field. So take note of this. When you are writing or submitting your references, be mindful of the number of references that you have put. Try not to get too carried away. Now, choosing an appropriate journal. Now you have done your outline, you have compiled, you have, either in the beginning stages and as a working document, you have already started to do your research and have already fed into the different section. The next thing is now to choose an appropriate journal for your particular work. Okay, so deciding on a suitable journal means that you need to find the journal that will address the right audience. Okay, so audience is very important. It's not enough for you to just say, hey, here's my research, then I will just take it to the journal of whatever. The journal that I choose needs to be in line with what my research and my research questions we're trying to unveil or to answer. Okay, so aim for the right audience and aim for high impact factor journals, then adopt their style. And I emphasize the point of high impact factor journals because it is always good to shoot for the stars, because even if things don't go well, you know that you can land on the clouds. But if you already start low, then you have you don't have a lot of room to fall back onto. Okay, you can already, just to set yourself up in terms of the quality that you are striving for in terms of the journal. Okay, go for those top journals. Even if you don't make it, the nice thing is that you always get reviewer or editor comments, which you will now take in, fix your paper, and then make it better, incorporating those advices that the reviewers or the editor was telling you to fix. The second step is that once you have now found, maybe before I go into the second step, the type of journal also that you will be choosing for your research paper is also motivated by the research that the research that have come before yours. You know, so as you are doing your literature reviews, you are reviewing and you are identifying gaps. Those papers that you are reviewing are also an indicator that it seems like people or the work that is interesting me is mostly published in this particular journals. Okay, so those journals also can be your targets. You can use your literature surveys and reviews as also a tool of choosing which journal to go for. Then after you have done that, you then need to consult. Very important for me to stress this point. You need to consult the list of accredited journals prior to submitting your paper. If you are not sure, you can always visit the Department of Higher Education websites. They do provide a list of what is accredited. So it's very, very important because you tend to find a lot of predatory publishers and journals. As you can see, I've put here below. So Unisa provides that link. If you go to your Unisa e-library resources, they do provide a link of which journals are predatory. This means that these are not accredited. They are just trying to make money off from people. So at the first glance, they look very professional. They tend to imitate the ones that are accredited. But Once you get closer, especially after you've made payments, then you realize that actually these journals are predatory. And the sad thing is that publishing in predatory journal reflects negatively on you. Okay, so it will always be that stain next to your name that this person is associated with predatory things. So to guide you, once you have decided on the journal, check. The Department of Higher Education provides this list of accredited journals. Okay, so in the list, you would see it is an Excel spreadsheet. It has what is accredited by the Department of Higher Education and Training. There's a Norwegian list. There's a Web of Science there. There's Scopus there. Okay, so you just go onto those tabs and you just click on the search, find and search button. You type Journal of Membrane Science. Is it on Scopus? If you find that it's not on the Scopus list, go to the Web of Science, go to the Norwegian list, go to check carefully and thoroughly before you waste your good research into journals that will not even account or amount to anything at the end. Okay, always check. If you are not sure of this, you can also consult with your supervisor to guide you in the process, but also the Unisa library resources do provide such functions. Okay, always check that you are aiming for the right kind of journal, because at the end of the day, as I say, you end up losing such good quality, meticulously done research to just a group of predators. Be vigilant, be mindful, consult. This tends to happen a lot, especially when in the chase of, remember earlier on when I was speaking of quantity and quality. So in the chase of quantity, sometimes chasing for numbers, you end up just doing things in haste and just going with whatever journal is able to take your paper in, and then you miss out on the important, on the nitty-gritties. Be mindful, be vigilant. Don't lose out. Don't give away your good research to predatory journals. Now, I now want to talk to you. We've learned about publishing or writing for expert audiences. Okay, writing scientific publications. I want to talk to you briefly on why it is important that we, as early as now, engage on publishing to non-expert audiences. Okay, so when you are, while publishing in peer-reviewed journals is important. I mean, it's a requirement of the university. It's good for your career. It's good. It's a good indicator of the quality of your master's, of your PhD. It is still of vital importance that you also do not neglect another class of people, which are non-experts. These are people who are not in your research field. These are people who are laymen, who have no clue or understanding of all the technicalities that you are all about. Because if we remember, most of our research project funding bursaries are subsidized from taxpayers. These are teachers, these are nurses, policemen, you know, people who are not expert or equipped with knowledge and may not even have access to all these big journals and research papers that we publish in the big journals, okay? We tend to, as scholars, as academics, neglect that very important class of people, okay? So I want to emphasize and encourage to you today that while it is important that we fulfill the expert part, let us not neglect the non-experts. So the 21st century requires skilled graduates who can find meaningful ways of communicating their research to non-expert audience. If you can master the skill of communicating not just to your peers in your scientific, in your research discipline, but also are able to communicate and inform the ones that might not even be as educated as you are, you would have mastered this. You would have done a good job. So at every Unisa Research and Innovation Showcase, there normally is a segment which is known as FameLab. So in the segment, Unisa invites a media company, science communication and media company, which is known as Jive Media Africa, to come and provide this training to young scholars, to masters, to doctoral students, and even to staff, free of charge. All you have to do is to subscribe to the showcase. Okay, and what these people from Jive Media Africa do is that they provide training of how to take these complex scientific terms and jargons and all the wonderful complex things that we are doing within our own research disciplines and teach you tools on how to break it down such that the important message or the message behind the research that you are doing clearly comes out even to a person who is not educated. Okay, so it is important, and I stress once again that subscribe to things such as these. Okay, FameLab is an international competition which is designed to engage and to entertain by challenging young scientists such as yourself to communicate their science to a public audience in under 3 minutes. We're going to talk about it a little bit more in the next slides. So such initiatives, I think it's something that I always feel and think lies and rest upon us as young and upcoming scholars to take charge of, because if we are being honest, our professors have a lot, their focus is mainly on other things, on educating, on applying for funding and all the many other things, and they might not have time to carry out these important messages. So the responsibility lies upon young academics such as yourselves to carry these messages across, bridge the gap between experts and non-experts. Okay, everyone needs to be on board with what is happening. Okay, you need to restore faith and confidence in people, especially in a world where things seems to be going haywire. If you can communicate with them that, you know what, and as much as things are going the way that they are going, my research or the work that I'm doing for my project is looking at, I'll make an example from myself, is looking at how we can better treat the water that we drink such that even the tiniest of pollutants do not manage to seep in and we end up finding them in our glass of drinking water. So I'm looking at how best to clean. What strategies can we come up with such that when my technology is fitted onto the purification steps, those kinds of things are removed so that we can live healthy and longer and be in good health. You know, restore confidence in people. People will listen. But the only thing that you need to be mindful of is that people which are non-experts, they relate to people. Okay, you cannot come and present yourself to them as a mathematician or a statistician and bombard them with that jargon. So by doing that, you would have lost them. But if you subscribe to training such as this, you will walk away being equipped with other skills other than you just publishing your research in scientific papers. You will walk away with more than just a science research paper publication skill. So I urge you, if you haven't subscribed to such platforms, they are free of charge. Every time when there's a UNISA Research and Innovation Showcase, there always is this science communication and media company that comes to play. So please do subscribe to it. Now, just for you to see that this is not just something that I'm making up and trying to waste your time, I want to show you or to talk to you a little bit more about it. So, as I said, it is a science communication competition which is aimed at engineers, mathematicians, scientists, technologists. It's not limited to just these three. Anyone who is working, who is doing research, is trained on how to communicate better. So, in as much as they say the age there is 21 to 35, it doesn't mean that if you fall outside that range, you will be chased out. No, you still will get in and be trained. Perhaps what may happen is that you may not be able to take part in the competition per se, but the training that is given to all the participants, you would also be subjected to at the very same scale. So, and another thing is, all of us, I like to believe, because we are in our master's and in our doctoral degree stages, we are very young. Young, when we speak of young, it's not aimed only at the age aspect. You are young in research, in your profile, within your scientific discipline. You are yet to grow and become a well-published scholar, a professor, a whatever, you know. You are young in that context, okay? And so it is important that while you are still at university, you grab hold of all opportunities that are being presented to you, such as this one. So what happens here is that contestants are given 3 minutes to talk about their research project in a fun, engaging, less complex manner. The aim is to share your research with the ordinary public, okay? So a grandmother needs to be able, they should be able to walk away with an understanding of what is it that you are doing in the lab. If you can master that art of being able to communicate across, you would have nailed it. Okay, it was first introduced by the British Council in the UK, London, and has now extended over 30 countries. In South Africa, here we are, we form part of the people that constitute the whole FameLab international aspects of it. But before you can hop onto the international stage, you need to prove that you are based within your own country. Okay, now for my own journey with FameLab, I started participating at my home university, which was Unisa, and then I moved on to participating with other universities and other research councils, and from that we then moved on. I was selected to being the overall South African winner, and then because I was the South African winner, I moved on to represent South Africa at the international finals, so at the international stage in the UK. So it was quite an eventful journey for me. As you can see, the smiles on the pictures there. This was during the crowning of the South African FameLab representative. As Tony mentioned earlier, it then made news all over. This was back in 2016, by the way. It's nothing recent, but even though it was back then, the skills, the knowledge, the know-how that I gained from it and from participating is something that till this day still resonates with me, and that is why I found it so important, so beneficial. It opened me up to many other opportunities, which is why I think you too need to take time out. When you see the Unisa Research and Innovation Showcase coming up next time, join, hop in. Okay, so after winning, I went on to the UK. These are all the international participants that I was with. We're from 31 countries. When you get to the UK, you still need to compete and be cut down to just 10, and I was lucky to make it to the top 10. This was me at the final stage now, where they needed to crown the overall FameLab International winner. Unfortunately, I didn't walk away with this one, but nonetheless, the journey and I think for me, having started at Unisa, engaging with such competitions, I mean, such communication training, until eventually getting onto to the international stage, said to me, even though I do not walk away with the title, first of all, I went there, as you can see, the flag on my lanyard. I stopped, my name was seldomly used. I stopped being referred to as Nozip. I was now coming up on stage is South Africa, you know. It came with such an honor to know that I'm doing it and I'm doing it for my country. So definitely go forth and subscribe to such trainings, okay? We speak of the importance of publishing your research in scientific journals, but do not neglect this aspect, the non-scientific, non-expert audience part. It's not just FameLab, there's also the Conversation Africa, where they are open to taking up contributions and written pieces of work from scholars, okay, and then publish it. It's a newspaper platform, okay, so we've got quite a lot of such science communication engagements at our disposal. And so let's grab hold of those. Now, from this first part, if anything else, these 4 points, always be mindful of. Good writing takes tremendous effort. Always starts with an outline. Outline is such a good thing that prepares you for the bigger picture, okay? The bigger paper, the bigger, as I said, there's a lot of time that goes into the designing of the tables, the figures, the text that will go into your paper. But if you can start with an outline as early as now, you cut a lot of time towards the end when you have accumulated all of your data, you've collected all of your data. Secondly, what I want you to remember, papers are evaluated for accuracy, for logic, for scientific interest. You need to be honest with yourself. After you have completed and combined your research paper, ask yourself, are these 3 things coming out of my research paper? Is my research accurate? Is it backed up by data, and data that is repeatable? Okay, very important. That it's one thing to just say that, hey, look, I was able to design this and this is what I found, but it needs to show also that even the next day and the next day and the next day, if I do the same thing, I will get the same result. Accuracy. Is it logic? Is it because whether it is for experts or non-experts, the story that is being told by your research needs to be logical. One idea flowing into the other. There needs to be a story that needs to be told out of that, okay? And then finally, scientific interest. Does it resonate with people in my field? Should people in my research field care to read my research paper, and why? What is it that I'm saying that other people have not already said? Spark scientific interest. Thirdly, sometimes even a good paper can be rejected. I just want to bring this also to your attention, that whilst you would have checked for errors and all of these things, there would be instances where your paper will be rejected. It doesn't always mean that the paper was not good enough. Perhaps it didn't fit into the scope of things of that particular journal, or there was just something that there's an aspect that was missing in your paper that you didn't unveil or unpack clearly, and so they do not see the need of having your paper in their particular journal. When that happens, when the rejection happens, because it will happen, it's not that I'm wishing it upon you, but it will happen. In some instances, you need to learn how to cope with rejection. It doesn't mean that you are a failure or you are a loser of some sort, no. What it means for you is you take a step back, reassess very quickly. Look at perhaps changing the choice of journal, because with the rejection, when you are getting rejected, the journal, the reviewers and the editors, they will point out to you. So the rejection is not a silent, closed off one that, hey, your paper has been rejected, bye-bye. No, they reject and they provide, it is substantiated with reasons, okay? So look at those reasons. Why was my paper rejected? Reassess, and they sometimes go to an extent of giving you the reasons, and they also then say, we also suggest, some would say, we suggest that, or they will recommend, maybe a better word is they recommend that our journal is perhaps not into that aspect, but we recommend that you send it to the Journal of Applied Catalysis B, for example, because that particular journal is specifically dealing with what your work is presenting. Okay, so reassess quickly the choice of journal, fix any weaknesses that the reviewers identify, reformat your paper for the second choice and send it off. You know, don't sit and wait and just be complaining and be in such a dark spot that time passes, because remember, we are in a very competitive space, whether we like it or not. And we are not the only ones thinking about the things that we think we are thinking about, you know? So if you're going to sit back and hold on to your paper and just feel bad and sad. Someone else somewhere in China is already thinking, is doing, is executing, is, you know, by the time you wake up and send yours off, they will say, nope, we already have one similar to this. And then you get rejected again. That is why I say reassess your choice, fix the weaknesses, reformat, send it off right away. Lastly, seek opportunities. Seek opportunities to share your science, to share your research with wider non-expert audiences. It is a good way, sorry for the spelling, it is a good way to brand your profile on the continent and globally by showcasing your work. I think very early on, I mentioned to you the statistics in terms of how many graduates we are now producing, not just at Unisa, but in South Africa as a whole. There are many master's graduates, there are many doctoral graduates that are coming up. So if there's anything that you in your own small space can differentiate yourself with from the rest, then do it. Make sure that by the time that you leave the Unisa premises, you leave Unisa gates, you walk away with not just a qualification, you walk away with not just that paper, written your name, ID number, and that this is to certify that so-and-so has passed, but you are actually walking away of Unisa with a career. Use this time wisely. There are so many resources at our disposal. I shared with you now about the FameLab, about the Jive Media Africa people, about the Conversation Africa people that Unisa does bring free of charge to us. They pay. All we have to do is to subscribe to such things. Milk out all the opportunities as much as you can, such that, I say again, you are not only walking out with a paper with your name to it, but you are walking out with a career. You are able to stand amongst other graduates, stand out, I beg your pardon, amongst others, okay? Take part, take advantage of such platforms. Now, coming into part 2, I just think I will just, because instead of just breaking it into 2 pieces, I will just continue also with this part, because a lot of things that I've already said on the written part also apply on the presentation skills part. So you're going to see that with the presentation skills part, we'll simply be moving much more quicker, because a lot of things, at the end of the day, written, verbal, they are both forms of communication. It's just different tools that are used for the both. But the message behind the storytelling is still the same. They are both still driven by the need of communicating stories. So some of the things that I've already said earlier on, I will not be repeating this on this part, but what I will be doing on this part is simply highlighting to you some of the things that you can take into account as you are preparing your own presentations going forward. So what I will be covering on this part is how do we communicate? We've already seen on part 1 that we can communicate our research through written work by submitting publications. This side on presentation skills, we're going to be looking at paraverbal communication skills. We're going to look at non-verbal communication skills. We're going to look at how can one go about in speaking like a star. Fourthly, we're going to look at how can you create compelling PowerPoint presentations, things to avoid and to look out for, and some physical relaxation techniques that you can already take or put into practice if you have not already been doing so. Now, presentation skills. Good communication skills are needed in order for you to be able to provide an excellent presentation, okay? You could have, you could have prepared such nice, clean slides, but if you cannot communicate your research ideas, if you cannot communicate your research story, then unfortunately your presentation becomes a fail. So you need to master these communication skills and incorporate them as early on so that the content, which is the research that you are conducting, together with how you deliver it, they gel and they marry and they give rise to this beautiful thing, which is an excellent presentation. Okay, so without being able to verbalize your research ideas and opinions, unfortunately, you stand a very little chance of having a successful presentations. You need to learn to verbalize, Because if you have these brilliant ideas, brilliant plans, brilliant things in your mind, but I mean, you are not able to execute or to relay across to the receiver, then you have very little chance of having a successful presentation. It really does exist. There's a thing called glossophobia, which is a fear of public speaking, and believe me, it happens to even the best of the speakers in the world. Okay, but you should not look at public speaking or presentation per se as something that is meant to cripple you. Okay, so have a different outlook, a different perspective. Use this nervousness that you have to prompt you to prepare, to be on your toes, so that you do not become complacent. Okay, so that you do not become relaxed and think, you know what, I will see it on the day of presentation. Use the nervousness, the fear. It happens to the best of the speakers in the world. I remember the pastor from my church was sharing with us this one Sunday where he was speaking that I am a 70-something-year-old person. I have been preaching for almost 30 and above years now, but believe me, every Saturday night, I still get nervous thinking that, oh, Sunday is coming. I need to go and stand in front of all these people, you know? So imagine 34 and more years later, he still gets the same nervousness. So I think what is important, what he was trying to show us is that if something stops scaring you, if it doesn't strike fear, doesn't have the nervousness to it anymore, you tend to be complacent, you tend to be relaxed. And once you are complacent and relaxed, this is where now you start making a lot of mistakes. So look at the fear, look at the nervousness that happens to you before you present, during your presentation, as something that actually is there to prompt you to prepare better, to keep you on your toes so that at all times you give great delivery. Okay. You also need to be mindful of the noise. The noise not only being limited to the sound that people will be making, there will always be noise in the background. There will always be, you know, when you're presenting, and fortunately for us now in the virtual platforms, you're able to mute my microphones. But if we think back to how things were before we switched onto the virtual platforms, you will realize that there would be instances when you are giving a presentation, but people are talking. Sometimes the room is cold. Maybe the air conditioning was turned on very high. Or you look around the room and you just see wandering thoughts on your audience's faces. You know, all of those things are known as noise. But what is important is that even in the presence of noise, you need to make sure that your voice rises above all of that noise. Take note of it. You will be distracted, of course, but quickly go back up. Make sure that your voice rises above all of that, okay? Next, learn from the audience's body language. So as you are delivering a presentation, especially under normal conditions before we switched onto the virtual modes of presenting, but the audience's body language speaks volume. Okay, if you look around the room and you see that your audience is starting to have wandering eyes, they are putting their hands on their chin, like they are thinking that no, you can just sort of read from their facial expression that perhaps what I'm saying might not necessarily, they might be in doubt of. When that thing happens, you need to quickly adjust your message and qualify it by perhaps giving an example to make it more clear. Perhaps you were talking about how when I increase temperature, the viscosity of my whatever solution becomes very low, and then people start to have these wandering eyes or expressions. Quickly qualify, why are you saying what you are saying? Quickly provide an example of, you see, when you are heating up a whatever, you will see that you're starting with a block of butter. When you turn up the heat, it starts becoming loose until it becomes liquidy, and then the viscosity becomes high. So you see, you've now slotted in an example that is resonating with the house, with the audience. Okay, remember, the purpose of your presentation is to get your message across. Okay, you want to get whatever research that you have done, investigation, surveys, whatever it is that you have done, you wanted to get it across so that you can create a shared understanding. Okay, by the time you finish, people must have a shared understanding of what it is that you were trying to communicate with them. So why is it important to have good presentation skills? Because as part of your master's and doctoral training, you are required to give progress presentations of your research, either to your supervisor, to your research groups, to your departments, when you are defending your thesis upon completion of your study, and also when you are attending conferences. So it's something that you cannot run away from. You will, one or all of these things that I've mentioned just now, you will need to do a presentation of some sort. You cannot avoid it. So you need to learn the skills, master, as I've been sharing with you some of the things that you need to look out for. So how do we communicate? We've already seen on the first part that we can communicate our research through writing, but on this part, we're looking at the spoken part of communication. So through spoken word, there are two components of spoken communication. There's the verbal. Verbal refers to this is what you are saying. So it speaks to the content of your research, okay? Verbal. Paraverbal means how are you saying what you are saying? How is your tone? How is your speed? How are you pitching? What's your volume? Are we able to hear you? Are we able to make out the words? Are you able to articulate the words clearly? Okay, all of that forms part of the paraverbal communication. And then there's the nonverbal. Nonverbal is the one that is based on body movements. So the gestures, the body language that accompanies your words. Are you presenting with your arms folded across your chest? Are you busy tapping your feet as you are presenting your slides or your research? Or are you having a hunched posture as you are giving the delivery? You know, all of those things that you need to take into account. So with the written aspects of your research, you can sort of get away with all of these things. You don't have to worry about your body language. I mean, you could be writing your paper whilst slouching on your bed, sitting down, resting, you name it. But when it comes to the verbal presentation of your research, you need to be cognizant of your verbal demeanor, your paraverbal, your nonverbal. All of these things work together in shaping the kind of presentation that you will deliver. Okay, so talking to the tone, pitch, and speed here with the paraverbal, it's not just what you say, but it's also how are you saying it. Okay, the research content and how you are explaining it work together in creating a shared understanding. Pitch. It's often said that when you use a very low pitch, it's very commanding. It's a serious, authoritative kind of pitch, okay? But very high pitch is linked to nervousness. As a word of advice, I would advise you in order for you to keep your audience interested, you need to try and vary your pitch as much as possible so that when you are hitting those very important aspects of your research, you sort of bring the pitch of your voice. You play around with the pitch, bring it a bit down, and then bring it back up again, you know? Tone, you need to sound upbeat, you need to sound warm and under control and clear, okay? Tone is also everything. While you are speaking, I know it might be difficult to do, but try and smile. Because what smiling often does is that it warms up your voice and it makes people want to listen to you better. Speed. When you speak very slowly, okay, you tend to lose your audience to a point where they begin to finish off sentences for you, okay? So you do not want that. It can be very irritating and annoying. Try to have a moderate speed. I know when we are nervous, we tend to speak very quickly so that we can get whatever we need to say across, but when we speak too fast, we tend to compress a lot of information and some of the things may even get lost. Okay, as an advice, you can even try to record yourself. Check for the pitch. How am I pitching? My tone, my speed. So this helps you to put yourself in your audience's shoes. looking at the non-verbal parts, your body is sending out, whether you like it or not. When you are doing this live presentation in front of an audience, your body sends out a message that is just as important as the message itself. Okay, so here you cannot get away with the fact that you have just designed or developed this amazing computer that is able to transform this into that. You know, you've just come up with a freezer wave, if I can call it that I've invented something just like a microwave, where within a matter of seconds I can be able to heat stuff up, but also on the freezer side, I can, in 30 seconds or less, I'm able to make things cold just like that, you know. So you could have been doing or coming up with something so novel, but if your body is not sending out the correct message, we tend to not care when you are presenting about the message itself. So your words must line up with your body language. You would be surprised that even with the virtual setup, it doesn't exempt you from not being mindful of these verbal, paraverbal, body language types of communication. We are using virtual means, but still treat it as though you can see the audience is with you. Okay, so the audience is watching for both your verbal and your non-verbal communication. Be mindful. Gestures. So while gestures are very good, like when you want to emphasize a point, you stretch your hands out, you point to things, but you need to watch out that they are not done too much, that you start becoming too destructive. People can start to be getting a little bit impatient with you wiggling or biting your fingers or even pouncing your feet, you know. Be mindful of your gestures. You can use them to enhance your presentation, but it shouldn't be too much overdone such that the important messages ends up getting lost. Now, speaking like a star, Franklin D. Roosevelt has this quote that, be sincere, be brief, and be seated. You know, say what you need to say and be seated in a well, carefully thought, information-packed manner, and then be seated. Respect the time that you are given. So actually, when we talk of speaking like a star, the star is an acronym. That's the S stands for the situation. So when you begin a presentation, give the context, the background, the who, the where, the when. So if we look back at the writing that we did, the writing skills that we did in the first part, this is the introduction of the background. So you see that whether you are doing the written parts or you are doing the verbal presentations, they still follow the very same format. Your opening statement should always be the situation. Give the context and the background. Secondly, T for task, the what, the why. What were your research questions? Which now, linking it back again, these are now your study objectives. So you give the introduction and background, you come to your study objectives, and you justify why your research is needed. So this is the task. A for action. Action speaks to the how. How did I do it? What did you do to resolve the research problem? Okay, the methodology. Experimental, how you went about addressing the particular research problem. R for results. What was the result of my action? Okay, after having carried out the research that I did, what were my findings? And make sure that once you have done all the S, T, A, and R, you end off on a very strong and a blissful note. So what makes an effective presentation? Firstly, you need to avoid information overload and overcrowded PowerPoint slides. Less is more, okay? Use pictures, graphs, table schematics when you're doing PowerPoint presentations to compress a lot of writing, okay? It shouldn't be too packed. Your slides shouldn't be too crowded. Secondly, research the content thoroughly. The information that you present to your audience, it needs to be accurate. Thirdly, you need to make use of contrasting colors for text in the background, okay? For example, you can use a black font color when you are using a white background. Try to avoid using yellow as a font color as much as possible, because regardless of the background, yellow has a tendency of not being visible. Always think of the outcome. So think of the end before you start your presentation. What outcome do I want to achieve? Do I want to inform? Do I want to inspire? Do I want to explain? Do I want to change perspective with my research that I'm presenting? Am I trying to teach? Am I trying to reassure people in my field that a particular technology is still relevant and it still works? So these are the questions that you should ask yourself before or as you are preparing your presentation, that what outcome are you expecting? Fifthly, audience analysis. Understand the audience. Who is my audience? Determine their needs. How do I want my audience to respond? You also need to have good listening skills. Ask for clarity. Identify where the other person, try to identify where the other person is coming from. So normally during the question and answer sessions, you can also start getting into this habit of repeating the question that you have been asked, just to make sure that you are understanding and you are on the same page as the person that is asking you the question. Also doing this also helps you to sort of process better and plan better the answer that you are about to give. Lastly, avoid comparing yourself to a previous speaker. I know that we all get into that tendency, especially when you in a conference where the person before you received a lot of positive comments, a lot of claps, that you now start feeling anxious and comparing yourself to that person. But you can avoid this by telling yourself that, you know what, you know your content, you know your research, you did your research in your own way, and also you have your own personality and way of bringing ideas and points across. And then finally, some of the relaxation techniques that you can use prior to doing presentations. You can try some breathing exercises, because sometimes if it can be crippling if you are not able to manage your nerves very well. Some people pray before they present. So find what works for you. These are all the things that I've listed here that you can use or adapt and bring into your own presentations to prepare and get yourself calm before stepping onto that stage. Visualize, see yourself doing the presentation and getting positive feedback. And to end off my the workshop today, or what I have to say, I want you to remember these 4 things. Whether you are communicating in written form or verbally, the research needs to tell a story in a logic and concise manner. Prepare well ahead. Keep adjusting, modifying, checking until it's almost perfect. A string of impressive publication can propel a young researcher such as yourself into their next career stage. Investigate important questions, and when you do that, the world will listen. Ladies and gentlemen, with that, I wish to thank you all for your time. Thank you.